welcome to CJC Adventures. Cole here, and today I'm in Newquay in Cornwall. We're going to take a look back in time, way back to 1967, when Beatlemania was at its height, when John, Paul, George and Ringo came to Newquay and stayed at the famous Atlantic Hotel. They stayed here to film the Magical Mystery Tour, and that actual film wasn't popular with fans. It was roughly made and the story wasn't great, but when they came to Newquay, to the Atlantic Hotel, they all enjoyed it, and there was mass Beatlemania, as you would expect from the Fab Four. So we're going to take a look at the photo shoot that they did here at the Atlantic Hotel and match some places up to what they looked like then to what they look like now. And I don't think a lot has changed, so I can't wait to see this, of where the Fab Four, the Beatles, were. So let's go and see what we can see. And this is the Atlantic Hotel here in Newquay, and this is where the Beatles would have stayed, right in this building. And they stayed a few nights. They were only supposed to stay one night, but I believe they stayed a bit longer than that. But yeah, they would have liked it here, they definitely would. And we're going to take a look now at where they would have been back in 1967. Well, this is where the Beatles come, Maureen. This is where they would have had a drink, relaxed, done the Magical Mystery Tour. Posh, we've been done up a few times since then. Oh. Look at that. Do you think they walked up them stairs, the Fab Four? Huh. The Fab Four walked up them stairs. That's the lounge. Marvellous, eh? Now, by all accounts, when the Beatles were at the Atlantic Hotel, they obviously stayed a few nights, and they would, indulge in the odd drink, a meal from the hotel, of course. And there was a lady who actually worked at the Atlantic Hotel at the time, and she said that she saw Paul McCartney, and he was sitting there, and over the far side was Ringo Starr, and the lady's husband, who was also there, actually went over and asked Paul McCartney if he would dance with his wife. She was a bit too shy to ask him. He says, "Yes, I will dance with your wife if that's what you want me to do, but unfortunately I'm not a very good dancer, as I can't really dance that well." But he did dance with the lady, and by all accounts he actually stepped on her foot by mistake, and the actual mark on her shoe, she actually kept the shoe many years later as a memento of her time dancing with Paul McCartney. And by all accounts, her husband was also very approachable to the other Beatle who was there at the time. That was Ringo Starr, and actually played billiards with Ringo Starr. Apparently, he did like to play billiards. I don't know whether he likes to play them now, but that was at the time, in 1967. And that just shows how approachable the Beatles actually were. And, of course, they still are, aren't they, Paul and Ringo? And in this picture, we see John Lennon, who looks to be doing a scene for the film. He's in full costume attire, and you can see the fans in the background. They're looking on and watching the filming. You've also got some girls on the one side, and they're in their costumes. They're in their bathing costumes by the looks of it. And this was actually filmed at the Atlantic Hotel's swimming pool in the outdoor area of the building itself, and it was a scene. I don't know whether this was actually used in the film. It may have been, because the film itself did have some quick scenes. But let's take a look at what it looks like today. Well, today the pool has changed a little bit. The way it's probably been updated. Tile work, of course. Since 1967, you would need to do a little bit of work, wouldn't you, since then, as swimming pools do need a lot of maintaining at times. But the swimming pool is all in the same place as it's always been. And if you notice that wall on the one side, that wall is still there and it's been updated as well. But by all accounts, that's the same wall as you see John Lennon walking along the pathway right next to it. Now, as you can imagine, the Beatles would have been bombarded with fans, they would have been bombarded with hysteria, and just want to get a piece of them, touch them or get an autograph. Because back then, you didn't have selfies, did you? But as you can see Paul McCartney here. He's coming up the hill. I imagine he's probably just been filming, or he's just come here and got off the bus, the famous Magical Mystery tour bus, and he's come up here, and as you can see the fans are around him, and the fans, well, they want a piece of him, don't they? Now you can tell that that is where it is, because if you notice those houses on the right hand side, now those houses are on the hill all the way down. So let's have a look how it looks like today. Well, today doesn't look any different really, does it? The road has probably been repurposed a few times, and those houses are still there, what I mentioned on the right, and the hill and the skyline doesn't look much different. A few little things might have changed, but since 1967 this really does look exactly the same as when they took that famous photo of Paul McCartney coming up this hill with the fans surrounding him. Now, one famous photograph which was taken of the Beatles and the cast members and crew of the Magical Mystery Tour was shot and taken on the back premises of the Atlantic Hotel. Now, as you can see from this photo, at the top you have John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and to the right Ringo Starr, and at the bottom, near the bottom step, you have George Harrison. Now, this was taken, I think it was round about when they got all their footage of what they wanted in Newquay, and you can see the Magical Mystery Tour bus in the background, and just to think that tour bus was one famous vehicle. Let's have a look at what it looks like today. Well, today it looks exactly the same. I'm so surprised that it does look the same after all these years, since 1967. The steps are still the same where the Beatles stood. They're the same steps, they're the same posts they stood against with their cast and crew members, all smiling, all laughing, and by all accounts they're very approachable. But these are the actual steps, and that is where the Magical Mystery tour bus stood behind them, and it looks exactly the same, which is fantastic and fab, of course. Now, another famous photograph is when we see John Lennon standing on the Hewers Hut monument, and they did a photo shoot of him and the Beatles on this monument, and it was pretty much while they was here, they sort of looked for places where they could take photographs and whatnot. But let's have a look at what it looks like today. Well, today doesn't look any different, does it? Still white, I imagine. Been painted a few times since, but it's still here. And just think, the one and only John Lennon and the Beatles stood on that very monument, and of course they're still the same bricks. Nothing has changed, nothing looks any different. By all accounts they did do some filming inside there, and that filming, don't really know if they actually used that or they made it look as though it was somewhere else. But this is where they did that photo shoot of the Beatles in the Magical Mystery Tour film. And yes, this is still here, I'm pleased to say. Now they also took some snapshots, if you like, of George Harrison and standing by a railing. Now while he was standing by the railing, he looked pretty content. He looked pretty happy, in fact. And you know, I mean, George Harrison, I think he smoked for most of his life, and you can see a cigarette in hand. But you know, the Beatles did enjoy their time here in Newquay, and you know, from every picture you see of them, they do look all happy. They don't look rushed. They don't look, you know, fed up or anything like that. But you know, let's have a look what it looks like today. Now this is the area where George Harrison would have stood when he was doing, well, posing for that photo, shall we say. And this is where he stood, and as you can see, it seems strange to think that George Harrison actually stood here, you know, with all the life that George Harrison had. Like the rest of the Beatles, really, they went on to have good careers, and you know, George Harrison made some fantastic songs, and it's strange to think that he just stood right here. It really is something to think about, isn't it? One particular picture that was found only a few years ago, just off the actual cell, the white cell that we saw the Beatles and John Lennon sitting on, would be the viewfinder, which is just behind that monument. Now, there's a picture of Ringo Starr here, as you can see, and he's looking out to sea. He's looking at the viewfinder, probably not really looking through so much. He's just being photographed for the photo shoot, and pretty much just looking out. He's just probably posing, I suppose, and it's a photo that he obviously was aware of what was being taken. But let's have a look at what it looks like today. Well, today the viewfinder, a viewfinder, is still here. I don't think it is the actual one that Ringo Starr used, but it's still here nonetheless. On this photo we see Paul McCartney walking up a bit of a path, and he's dressed in typical 60s clothes, the jumper and so on, and he would be heading up, probably going on to relax after a day's filming. And you can see the sea just to the left in the background, and well, as you can see, you know, he probably thought, oh, you know, because he was sort of more involved with the film itself than any of the other members of the Beatles or anyone else. It was sort of his idea, and John Lennon probably thought, you know, it's a silly idea, but no, I'll go along with it. But you can see him here walking up a path. Let's have a look at what it looks like today. Well, today it has actually changed. You can still see obviously the sea in the background, but that building that you once saw behind Paul McCartney has changed. It's a different building now. It's a slightly more modern building, even though it looks, you know, like it has been a bit worn over the last few years, but it is a bit of a different building, and that was probably changed a little while after 1967 when the Mystery Tour film was filmed. So, but this is the actual location of where we see Paul McCartney walking up that slight hill. Now there was actually a picture of Paul McCartney as well when he was getting off the bus, and he was meeting members of staff and of course screaming fans, and they wanted to see who would get off the coach first. I do believe Paul McCartney got off the coach first, and this would have been the picture when he was getting off, and of course he's probably looking forward to seeing fans, but Beatles fans are like. Probably not so much today, but, well, maybe today, but they used to go hysterical, didn't they? And this would be where he would have got off the tour bus and been meted by members of staff at the hotel and getting ready to stay at the Atlantic Hotel. But let's have a look at what it looks like today. Well, it's a little bit different. The actual doorway has changed a little bit. Some decking has been added, and the windows are a little bit different as well. But this was actually the area, and if you look at it, not much has changed, I have to be honest. Some things have been updated and some things have been kept the same. Very traditional. It is a very traditional hotel, the Atlantic Hotel, and it's a terrific hotel. It really is. And that's it for today on CJC Adventures. Taking a little stroll down memory lane to 1967 and the Beatles' magical mystery tour, the photo shoot at the Atlantic Hotel in Newquay. And of course, history is great, especially when you look at British history of the one and only Fab Four, the Beatles, John, Paul, George and Ringo, and seeing where they actually was is always a pleasure. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe. Click on the subscribe icon and the bell. You'll be notified when each video is uploaded. And please share. And until next time, look after yourselves and each other. And goodbye for now.